Clarity. Jimmy Eat World album number 3. It was released on February the 23rd of 1999. Again, this is where the story gets a bit mental. It was released again through Capitol Records, which you'd think they wouldn't. You know, they've signed a band who have turned into something they weren't quite expecting and then put out a record that nobody bought in terms of what they were really expecting and who they've tried to push to radio and so on, and no one was really having it. So why would you keep that band around? Inexplicably, they do, for one more album. Jimmy Eat World know what the fuck is going on. They can see the writing on the wall, and so being given this, surprise chance to go again with Capitol Records, they see it as their last chance to make an album with major label money. And so if you thought about it again, you'd said then, we're going to use the money for Static Prevails. They really decide to do it with Clarity. They decide to go all out because when the fuck else are they going to be able to do it? They record again with Mark Trombino using studios like Sound City again, but they go way harder with all of that, which leads to the massively expanded instrumental repertoire that is employed for Clarity, which gives the record its kind of widescreen orchestral alt-rock appeal. When Clarity turned 20 years old in 2019, Jimmy Eat World put out a little, retrospective thing, and the quote I have is, "When we made Clarity over 20 years ago, our headspace as a band was a mixture of defeat and mischief. After the total commercial failure of Static Prevails, we knew that we were lucky to be given another chance by Capitol Records at making another album, but we also knew that it would very likely be our last. It was a last meal on death row. We loaded up our plate with string sections, timpanis, mallet instruments, and drum machines." That is the fucking attitude of Clarity, and that is why we have this fucking record.
This is an album of a band who had an idea, they had a vision, and they were like, this is our last chance to actually get to do this. Let's go ham. Let's not hold back for a single second.
Yeah, they were, 20, 21? Like, they didn't think they were going to make another record. They have way more at their disposal than a band like them should ever have. We're going to lean into this. We're going to use the studio. We're going to use everything. We're going to loop everything. Like, it is such a burst of creativity, and it's one of the most inspirational records I've ever heard.
This is one of those things where, again, you have to think kind of at the time and contextually in regards to Static Prevails, because if Static Prevails, we were talking about it being, it sounded big budget for the budding emo scene, and it would have been an album that their bands around them would have gone, wow, maybe one day we can get an album to sound like that. You kind of have to hammer that home for Static Prevails, because it's easy to forget that now because Clarity exists just around the corner. Because if Static Prevails sounds big budget for emo, Clarity sounds fucking galactic.
This is widescreen cinematic vastness in just how big and grand and classy it sounds.
In mainstream consciousness, there is one obvious moment for which Jimmy Eat World are remembered. Really, among fans, there are 3 records which are frequently touted as their best, their real peak, whichever one it is, whether that is aligning with the mainstream choice or going against it. But in that category, Clarity is Jimmy Eat World's first masterpiece.
Absolutely. It's not only is it Jimmy Eat World's masterpiece, to most people, the emos of the world, this is the emo masterpiece.
This is you could ask a bunch of us and they would tell you this is the best album the genre has ever seen.
Yeah, I think going again, if we're stopping short before they kind of graduate that class, this album it's magnificent. And when I first got into Jimmy Eat World, going beyond Bleed American, this was the first one that I took to in any large way, and it remains, I think, if I want to really bask in an album like this, I want it to immerse me and transport me. I want it, all of its details to wash over me like a refined, elegant bath. Clarity is basically the one in this whole field of music that I go to, and I imagine among the 3 of us, I'm not alone in that, right?
No, this is for a decade of my life has been my go-to. I need to look inside. I need to put something on that will make me walk out at night, look up at the stars, like daydream about having emotions, whatever. Like, this is such I think Sam said the word cinematic. That is so, it's so cinematic, it's so atmospheric, and ultimately, it's just beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the stargazing track at the end of Static Prevails. You've gone straight to it. This is the fucking vibe for that, right? Yeah. Like, it's almost like it's like an aerial view almost, like, you know, just flying over something, like a town, a city, whatever it may be, taking it all in. And it's an incredibly cinematic album for, you know, where this band has been. Again, just 5 years before this was when they were doing fucking that debut record, and they've turned into this, where, I suppose, again, in atmosphere, the fact that there's a song on it called Just Watch the Fireworks might just be the most quintessential song title for this imaginable, you know?
Yeah, and the lyric on For Me This Is Heaven, Do You Still Feel the Butterflies? Like, that and the title, Just Watch the Fireworks.
That crescendo
is
in
an
For
album
Me This Is
just
Heaven.
full of that moment, isn't it?
Yeah. Like, I'm such a, you know, sappy little emo that dozens of times in my life I've put this album on and just walked around my village at night, like just lit by lampposts and looking up at the stars, just being a wistful little like wet fart of a man.
Well, going back into just the ambition and the intent of this, I mean, it's pretty amazing that actually their musicality matched up to their intent, and it wasn't just like, oh shit, we're gonna lose our label soon, we better use all this money, but like, they put it to good fucking use, and they knew what they were doing with it. And this is where that U2 thing that I mentioned at the beginning will come up, because it's like, we are going to make the Joshua Tree of 90s emo, or whatever, like, you know, just that kind of U2 inspiring, emotionally rousing sound of majesty is what this whole record washes over you with. And it sounds like the bar being raised. Like, it really just does. Like, there's lots of 90s emo stuff I really enjoy and appreciate, and a lot of it thrives on its kind of intimate, raw sound. But this album flips the fucking grid on all of that. Like, this is proof of what you can really do in this lane with ambition and a touch of class, along with, of course, the resources to realise that dream.
I mean, that's it. Is that touch of class and that drive to be like, we're going to make an emo album. It's going to have all the core elements you'd expect from an emo album, but we're going to do more with it. We are going to make this album that other bands can't do. That, like, and again, maybe that's through the resources they had, but also the ambition, the idea, the vision to create something that is more than what the genre had seen at this point. And so, like, and again, a lot of it is built on kind of ideas that Jimmy Eat World had on the previous two records, like particularly on the last one, but just kind of like taking that idea to its most fully formed, like, completion, and it's just magic.
Yeah, and an added patience in songwriting, where Static Prevails had a lot of like slow down, build up, payoff moments, but the payoff moments and crescendos on this album are just incredible and so well earned. Like, and there's so many, like, they're looping so much, there's so much like layering. Like, there's a quote I love from Matt Pryor of the Get Up Kids, who said clarity is like the Paul's Boutique of emo, because it's just it's so.
That's awesome.
Yeah, like, we can talk about, you know, the songs are incredible, but just the production element of it is so important and so, like, impressive still.
Like, yeah,
the production doesn't sound 90s, and like, well, it doesn't 90s in there. It's a rock album with so much money pumped into it, but it still sounds so just classy and crystal clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think of all Jimmy Eat World's albums, this is the one that feels like the body of work, you know? Like, Bleed American is the greatest hits approach, and this one has it has a kind of aura from it. Like, even before you put it on, it just feels like a big proper fucking album. And let's get into it, really, because I mean, Table for Glasses, again, my god, if that isn't the most quintessential emo start to something. That slow, delicate build of drums where every ride cymbal tap feels like, you know, a moment, that simple repetitive clean guitar loop, and that harmonizing, you know, sweep melody. It's almost like a lullaby or something as the rest of the band slowly come in. It's that patient, slow approach to emo, which they very patiently developed over the course of their last couple of releases here, pretty much crystallized in, opening moments, isn't it?
Yeah, it starts like you imagine darkness, and then there's a small light coming in, and then the song sort of envelops you, and there's glockenspiel, and there's like by the end, Jim's doing
I think
like
the first sound is the organ that you hear.
Yeah, the organs, strings. It's immediately kind of going, look at all these things we've got, but we're doing it in this really patient, lush, beautiful, like
it's
slow
not
burning.
like, again, flashy. Like, here's a fucking
No, like
jazz quintet fucking going wild or whatever. But
but it's all there.
Also,
it's all there for you to hear. And,
it is,
and
but
just immerse yourself in.
it doesn't open with a rager. This one, it's the one album of kind of all their classics really that gets you immediately strapped down in your seat and ready for the vibe at play without going like, here's fucking mega tune, we'll play this live every single time, But the effect is kind of as immediate. You are immediately clear what kind of album you're going to be going into, what it's doing, because Clarity does, really function again as the kind of the body of work around it.
Yeah, and even melodically, like by the end of Table for Glasses, Jim's doing like a counter harmony almost. It's like sort of offsetting the main hook, and it's like a lullaby. You know what I mean? It's so simple and beautiful that it sort of lulls you into, well, like you say, like it lulls you into this emo masterpiece washing over you for the next hour.
Yeah, I think one of the big changes is that there's that kind of boisterousness around the heaviness of Static Prevails. Like those moments between pretty passages when it would just crunch and thrash around a bit, that here has morphed fully into grace.
Yeah. There are still moments where this album goes it goes a little bit harder, but it is...
Oh yeah, there are heavy tinged moments on it, but even they have a grace to them.
No, that's it. It's grace, class, whatever you want to describe it as. This is just sophistication that wasn't there before, is just there in spades on this record.
Yeah, and it's even there on the fucking single on the record, because they have the ability to make a kind of like cinematic, sweeping pop song that cracks the formula of getting the Boast of Both Worlds even with Lucky Denver Mint.
It's because that song has a perfect chorus that is just like that was almost like the Jimmy Eat World chorus that you're gonna get, like it's gonna like, and this is it, we've cracked it, we know exactly how to write our perfect chorus now.
Just as soon as Table for Glasses ends with sort of like the nice little bit of ambience, and then that looping drum pattern comes in.
That's what I mean about the drum pattern, because it's not just, again, banger or whatever. It's immediately identifiable, but it's also them playing with, the studio and stuff like that, the way that evolves.
Yeah, and it's so ear-catching and like, oh shit, I didn't anticipate this. Like, it comes out of nowhere after such a lovely song. But then, yeah, like, even the verses are some of the most catchy melodies you'll ever hear.
This time it's on my own.
Come on.
The little tilt down, and then ascending into you're not bigger than this, not better, why can't you that? Like, it actually breathtaking. It's Lucky Denver, it may be still for me a top 3, if not top 2 Jimmy World song. Like, it's fucking unreal.
I mean, that's a whole other question that I don't know if I could do, but Lucky Denver Mint is like, it is the moment this band kind of like graduate into being just like truly majestic, like, and like I say, the fact it is track 2 off this like stunning intro, and then they can kind of go, we can do that, but we can also then just fit in one of the best choruses and show that we still have that just amazing knack for pop melody, but we just make it sound more emotional.
Well, it is to be so hooky and so poppy, where that song got on soundtracks and stuff.
Yeah.
But it is so earnest and so fragile, and it is still, as we were saying, it's still playing with sound and experimentation. I love when the drum pattern mutates at the outro and just takes on these new aspects to it. Like, it feels like a wonderful part of the canvas of this album while being such a standout single, and I think that is an ability that Jimmy Eat World show on Clarity.
Like, even the build on the bridge to that song again, where they just like, and like again, that's an idea that they'll do again, but it just, the way they play with space and just feel every little aspect of this album, and so it never feels like anything isn't being maximized, and even when it is, like I say, it's stepping back and like it's making the most of the quiet, and and it just is playing with everything so perfectly how it needs to be.
It's the fact that shows how this album, if it got too lost in itself, if it got too, pretentious with we are going to use all of these instruments and stuff, it could be very to be disconnected from it. But that's not the kind of songwriters Jimmy World are, and I think it's very praiseworthy and admirable how on this album, it was their self-described we need to use all this fucking money because it's the last time we can do it album, but it's still so disciplined in that, and they never forget how to write a great infectious rock song so you get things like Crush, which is just a very simple little thick guitared alt rock song in the middle of the album, or the title track and the kind of immediacy
Your
of
New Aesthetic is another one that
well, I mean, I think that's a slightly different one, but so title track has a kind of radio ready guitar parts and stuff, but there's the ability to place songs like that in a canvas that elevates them, and Your New Aesthetic I think is an example of them kind of fucking with what a song like that can be, because that's like a little 2.5 minute song, and it has an identifiable Jimmy World trick of the immediate chugging, the dun 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 dun, and kind of the insistent picking, but what the start there could be something that ends up on Bleed American. Instead, it's not conventionally structured with like a big power pop chorus, is it? Instead, it's after that Take Back the Radio part, you just like a big fucking noisy like crush of elements. And if you listen with some headphones and hear the details in there, like there is way more to Your New Aesthetic than that song would have been in the past.
Yeah,
But that's the thing, is I think it's that magical balance of again it having that classic kind of like just powerful thing, and then the fact they can morph it and take it into that, like, that wall of noise that kind of like drowns out the vocals basically by the end of it. Like it's just that that they'll find space for that in a really quite tightly packed song is just so cool.
Even vocally, I really love how I think it's both Jim vocal tracks, but there's almost like in both channels, if you're listening on earphones, like a call and response, almost like Jim's finishing his own sentence with the other channel. It's really like it's a simple trick, you'd think, but it really adds to sort of like the aura of the album.
Yeah, and that song also very consciously reckoning with their kind of major label predicament at the moment, talking about, it's almost like a letter to the label of like, you didn't really give a shit about us, you didn't really pay attention to what we were doing, but this is real, we have to, like, there is something to this here that's worth paying attention to. So yeah, they take what could be pop songs and fuck with them. They land pop songs in the environment of what they're doing. Believe in What You Want is another one of kind of like, that staccato beat is almost like, kind of indie, kind of dance or something, but it's just immediately hooky. And again, it's about the balance of that immediacy with the beauty of when it turns into a chorus, it's all about wistfulness over anything else. And it works like a treat.
Yeah, and singing about like sheets of snow, it's so like, it builds, again, just building an emo world of like landscapes to imagine. And I love the keyboards on the verses of that song, and I love the way like the chorus almost swirls. You know what I mean? There's like sort of like a cascading quality to it. I think that's a really lovely song.
Yeah, well, Jim Adkins on this album is that there's still a bit of crack to his voice when he needs it, but in terms of like his ability to carry a melody with the warmth and emotion we know the way we know him, he arrives on this album. Like, I think the best melodies on Static Prevails, I think, are still Tom's, really, like 17 and Rockstar and so on. But Jim on this is just as he was in the live shows at the time, because this is the time that he begins to stand center stage at live shows, and kind of the Jimmy World show as we kind of imagine it comes into being, as opposed to slightly awkward two guys on either end of the stage, sort of in their own worlds. Just as it was in the live show, he is unfurling his wings on this album. Like, the chrysalis is opening, and it's a wonderful thing to listen to unfolding on this album.
And again, like with the changing of this album, it was the right time for Jim to become the lead vocalist.
Oh
like,
yeah,
again,
it's totally the right album for it.
I like Tom's vocals, and again, like I agree with what you say on Static Prevails, but like, and again, the one song Tom gets this album, I flipping love, but like we'll go into that. But for just the whole vibe of this record, Tom kind of splitting the vocals just wouldn't have worked as well. you need that warmth and just that beauty that Jim has with his vocals, and that way you write that he can carry a melody and just make it that much more just like that it's hugging you, that these vocal melodies that he's singing are just a warm hug around you, and just it's just so comforting.
Yeah, and if we're going chronologically on the album, like A Sunday is such a delicate, like really soft, beautiful song that almost has like an anti-chorus. It gets quieter and more minimalist for the first two choruses. It's like a shrinking violet, but then the last chorus it bursts and it's so lush, and Jim sounds so warm and lovely, and like even on the first two choruses his voice starts to like wobble a bit. He gets a bit like,
because he's emotional.
I know, it's
just like that the higher register that he has is just so ringing emotive quality that's right for this one.
Yeah.
He's still able to bring urgency when he needs it, but that gentleness is what Clarity needs, and you can't imagine anyone else singing these songs apart from Blister, of course, which is fucking killer. And I love that there is just this one, kind of rowdy Tom song in there, but it doesn't equally, it doesn't divert the album. It's not like As Static Prevails leftover. It alleviates you for a moment at a pretty kind of late stage in the track list. And the fact that it is like the one Tom song that they still regularly play live, like it's one of the most accomplished of his songs up to that point, with the different harmonies and stuff that come in.
Yeah.
It's got the how long would it take to walk across the United States all alone chorus.
The West Coast has been traumatized. Like it's the most anthemic and memorable his parts had been, so it's fitting.
Yeah. And I think because again, like the back half of the record, it does get quite ballad heavy, and then this is just that burst of like. And again, I love all of those ballads. I mean,
yeah. You have got the title track in there as well, which is a guitar drum, but it's great.
The title track comes just after this, isn't it?
I think this has some great sequencing. This album, like, it doesn't stay in any one zone for too long, but while letting you really fucking swim in the air in those.
But that's it. You get this bit where you get to just kind of like relax into these like lush, like quite varied but quite slower, more or like pretty tracks, and then you just get Blister and Clary as a 1-2 punch of just kind of like, here's the explosion of joy before we get on to what closes the record. But Blister is like just so good.
I love the harmonies at the end of Blister, and it's the perfect I love the album. It ebbs and flows. It does have, after Crush, which by the way I love Crush. I really love the crescendo at the end.
The power pop sort of melody.
Yeah,
of Crush.
The crescendo on it makes my heart sing. But after Crush, you get 4 quite slow, introspective ones. And then, you get one last burst at the end. And Blister it's got sort of a warm, nostalgic quality to it. And, and then at the end, it almost becomes a duet with Jim.
Like, Blister to me almost feels that kind of like, hey, remember the debut? Let's write that stuff with actual, quality songwriting and sound now.
Instrumentally, they are so good on this record. And I'm not referring to the extra instrumentation, but just the Jimmy Eat World guys and how they're able to support that. They have become, I used the word discipline earlier. This is what I think about when a Jimmy Eat World on this one, because it's not, again, stand-up performances, but they've become so textured and so careful. The bass is, immaculate. I love there are even some little drum hooks, like in Just Watch the Fireworks, the little da 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 when that kind of bursts. Precisely what's needed to add some level of pop to, a more subdued song like that. And then there is the way on this album, things like drum patterns and repeating guitar parts, they seem to pretty much become almost one with the layering of little xylophone chimes and all of this stuff, where I would point to the foundation of For Me This Is Heaven for that, and how it's almost spread out over all of these different instruments, all chipping in tiny parts that make up this living, breathing organism made up of all these parts that are all moving towards the same goal. It's really, really you must imagine the time that it must have taken to track in all of those parts and fit all those things together, but it's just seamless.
Yeah, For Me This Is Heaven has, just before the really warm crescendo moment, a line that's played on both guitar and piano interchangeably. So the guitar will do it, and then the piano will do it, and then it's
unbelievably detailed, this record.
The crescendo hits, and the guitar and piano are playing it together, and there's another guitar line on top. It's just so
and then you've got all the
Detailed.
vocals overlapping, and it's just perfect.
Yeah. And they have that level of transfixing you in something minimalistic on something like on a Sunday, which you mentioned earlier, which is just phenomenally pretty. You know, the instrumentation, the core chord progression, the vocal melody. There are parts on that where like the fragile little guitar embellishments and stuff make me think of Death Heaven. And when they're like 10-minute ferocious songs will hit like these serene moments of calm. Guitar approach is very, very similar, and you can bet, you know, the bands who you can imagine are fans of this record goes pretty fucking wide, because you said earlier, Mark, it is an inspiring album for both a feeling and an actualization of that feeling in the studio. I think the drum machines and the subtle use of electronics are interesting because they don't garishly scream 90s tech. It's not like a fucking pitch shifter album or something. They subtly suggest 90s tech. The one point where they really take over is 12/23/95, and that, for me at least, it gives it a really like warm, nostalgic kind of glow to it. Like there are almost like fucking little instant messenger, you know, melodies going on in that song. It's lovely.
That's what it is. That's one thing I see. You could say you could make it's maybe a little bit dated, but I agree with you. It's kind of just like, oh, that's just like a nice kind of just like relic of the 90s. But again, it feels like, again, they're like, well, we've got these electronics and these things like that. Let's get them in a song. And I think it's cool though. I think that because again, it is unique to that song.
Yeah, it's lovely. When I say, you know, of the 90s, it's almost like, you know, when people listen to like lo-fi like Sega scores or something, like Nintendo scores, like it has a kind of like, you know, a nostalgic, homely kind of feeling. Like Jimmy, well, they tap into like, again, there's some of those little computerized pops and stuff you get on this record, and then a Sunday has like those little electronic pulses up against cello arrangements, and it's so artfully done.
Yeah,
I mean, you even get like on a Sunday the chimes playing the guitar line to begin the song,
reinforcing it. I mean, come on, yeah. And it is. I think it's at this crossroads, this record, of being like the most ambitious shit going on in its genre right now in terms of bringing in all these elements, but it has this sensitivity about it that's not overwhelming you, that makes it feel at the same time kind of minimalistic and delicate, which is a really lovely little balance. And when that kind of minimalism is able to, almost contradictingly, but it's able to kind of align with the scope that they are able to achieve on this album that no one else was going to be able to doing, after one last fantastic rock song in Clarity, Goodbye Scar Harbor arrives, and that's another song that in Jimmy Eat World fan circles is kind of legendary, right? And it's because it definitely represents a certain side of the band at its furthest extreme. Yeah,
like, I mean, they're like, it's a 16-minute like epic kind of like emo prog closer on this record. It's gonna like be the cult favorite standout moment for a lot of fans because it's a one-off track in that way.
Yeah, the actual song itself is only like 2 minutes of the 16 minutes, and the rest is just
I think it's about 4.
Yeah, no, it's something like that. Yeah,
but like the rest of it just loops and different elements come in and out, and it's all so tastefully done. Like
he's so close to pushing that button that would I'd be like, oh, end it already. Like, but there's a magic to it, and I don't know if it's because it's the vibe that the album is taking me on and everything that I'm there by this point. But
I think it's a perfect closer for Clarity, you know, and it is from about kind of the 3.5 minute mark is when it starts to like repeat and ring out, and you know, the initial song portion it is good. It's lyrically inspired by the book A Prayer for Owen Meany that Jim Adkins was reading at the time, because he said that he was inspired by Anthrax always wrote songs about Stephen King books, and so he was like, I'm going to do a song about what I'm reading, which I love that. I love that there's a residue of Jim Adkins being that 80s metal guy somehow bringing Goodbye Sky Harbor about. But from that point of the song, it's almost like, again, that line between like emo and post-rock that exists, where like post-rock in the 90s is like the if you were doing like, you know, 6 degrees of music genres, you could jump from Swans to Jimmy Eat World via the medium of, you know, 90s post-rock, but you can just fucking lose yourself in it. And the way it progresses is amazing. The hushed layering vocalizations that all come in and just ring out, all around that kind of, impeccably produced core musical progression, which at this point in time is still being done analogly, because there's a rumor again that the song, like among fans, it's 16 minutes 13 seconds because apparently it's meant to represent the exact time that it takes to reach a certain altitude when taking off from Sky Harbor in a plane. But really, the band have said it's just because that was the exact length of the reel of tape that they were recording to, and that's how far it went. And so it does have a wonderful analog quality to it. And the last over 10 minutes of this album are one long build and fade out, but it's a fucking landmark in following that kind of path, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. It's the way they do just take this one core kind of like melodic passage and loop it and then add on and build, and like you go on a journey with this, like essentially this like vocalizing and like kind of like twinkly guitars and stuff. It's so kind of surreal in a way, but it's, as I say, the perfect end to this record.
Every time like I do start to find myself being like, okay, come on now, a new element comes in that I can attach myself to, like a na na na, or a new guitar, or
organ coming in or something. Yeah, I mean, for me, the looping nature of it just has this way of kind of like bleeding out over the horizon, just completely getting lost, to the point where you don't really register how much time is passing, and the echoing kind of reverberating choral vocalizations, they remind me even of like Alcest and stuff like that we've spoken about recently. But then the electronic element that comes in right at the end, there's the Postal Service and all of this kind of like experimental indie stuff that's going to come after this, definitely taking some cues from this. But when those electronic drums come in, you've been drifting in one space for so long that's like a release. It like slaps you upright. It's like, oh my god, holy shit, something is like fucking really like taking off here, and it's a hell of a way to do it. But then again, I was watching them play this album on the Phoenix sessions that they did from the other year, and they have like an extra live member doing things like keyboards and stuff, but it's not like it's with an orchestra. These songs do just hold up impeccably at the core of them in a 4 to 5 piece band environment, but with the assets of the studio behind them, you hear it on record, and god, like those strings on Just Watch the Fireworks, like Just Watch the Fireworks is like a masterclass of orchestral indie rock, whatever, like where it's the subtle percussion, the little percussive support on the strings, like it's immaculate, and it has this feel of like proper class and sophistication, along with just the warmth of emotion that, like, movie shit,
Yeah. No. Like this album has like soundtrack, like the sound to the big emotional moment in any movie. You could stick almost any song from this record on it, and it would make it better. Basically,
yeah. I forget that song is 7 minutes actually.
Yeah.
It's Just Watch the Fireworks is an emo epic, and
certainly
the
is.
way it starts so delicate. And you play me Jim Adkins singing "Here You Can Be Anything that scares you, and I think that scares you." I'm welling up just thinking about it. It's so beautiful, and then the song builds so patiently, but so like perfectly. It actually consistently builds until that release of just the string section, and it is incredible.
Yeah, the inspiration of this album, it's more than just I love these songs and I want to pick up a guitar and play. Like the attention to detail in this album and the ability to craft like a whole opus of this quality. The reach of the following albums is obviously larger, but it feels like when a band is particularly indebted to Clarity era Jimmy Eat World, there can be just more going on, because people like the Manchester Orchestra dude saying like, this was formative to the way that I approached songwriting. Like I said, all the kind of fringe stuff, like, the Postal Service and that feels like it's picking up just elements that this has left down, all the way into the kind of, those worlds of like, indie and emo world today, where whenever you hear that incredibly fine, that fine comb of production and recording and arrangements, this is a aspiring album for, musicians who want to kind of aspire to that level, and within the worlds of emotional heart on sleeve type songwriting, which you said it kind of straight out of the gate, Mark, rather than myself, but like Is this the high watermark for emo as an artistic achievement, at least up to this point?
Of all time. This is the Paul's Boutique of emo. It's the most important thing. This is just artistically, like, ambition-wise and, like, musically, everything about it feels special and, like, unable to, like, recreate. It's lightning in a bottle. This is emo.
Like, if we are taking emo in its purest, like, what, like, real emo is, or that, like, second
again,
wave
just
emo,
to clarify,
like,
just to clarify that I'm not putting this against the Black Parade or whatever. I'm talking about emo as we understand it from the kind of 90s perspective.
yeah, no, that's the thing. Like, because again, we'll like go talk about like other albums later on part 2 on this, but as that kind of like of 90s emo, if we're gonna bracket that, this is the 90s emo masterpiece. This is like a just untouchable like record that bands could look to and kind of go like, we wish we could have done that.
Yeah, I mean, part of me wishes I was actually just a Clarity snob with this band, because like some people are out there, because the album is just that good. But you know, it is pretty special that this band have a catalogue where this album can be seen as like the underdog favourite, not even the obvious one, because it is just exceptional, and it is an album of shimmering, beautiful sensation projected onto the largest screen that anyone could at this point in time. And I love that it was a product of, this is our last chance to do this, let's make it fucking count. And so it is a real landmark achievement for its entire scene, and still is. What's the best song on Clarity?
For me, it's a fight between Just Watch the Fireworks and For Me This Is Heaven.
I thought you were going to say between that and Goodbye Sky Harbor, because I know you like your post rock.
I did listen to that song twice right before recording in its entirety. I think I'm going to go with For Me This Is Heaven, which is just, for me, the most lush, warm, and like beautiful song on the record. Like, on the record, full of payoffs and crescendos that make me want to cry. For Me This Is Heaven, it is heaven.
For Me This Is Heaven is like the crystallization in one track of every idea on Clarity, almost. Like.
Yeah, and that crescendo is what pips it for me. The first time I saw Jimmy Eat World live, they played that and I teared up because I didn't know they were going to play it, and then they got to that part and I couldn't help it. It is so lush, and, you know, Jim Atkins is singing Do You Still Feel the Butterflies at Me? I do, Jim. Always, I always will.
Yeah, I would fucking adore to, because I know they've done this album like live on a couple of occasions. Like they did it on the Phoenix sessions, they did it in London. They did 2 shows where they did Bleed American and Clarity, and it is pretty well documented at this point that the Bleed American show was so much more substantially populated than the Clarity one. I would kill right now to go and see them do these songs live, just in terms of, again, the realization of all these arrangements and stuff is just absolutely incredible. Sam, best song on Clarity?
This is another one where there's kind of a three-way tie almost between Just Watch the Fireworks, Me This Is Heaven, and Lucky Denver Mint. But me being basic and loving that chorus, I think it's got to be Lucky Denver Mint for me.
I adore Lucky Denver Mint. I just adore it. Like I said earlier, to me it is one of the best songs of this whole story, of this whole era. The combination of pop sensibility and the attention to detail that comes with Clarity
is exactly it.
It makes that the combination of those two things, because I don't just want to put it down to, it's the catchy one, because it's the way, again, that those drum loops and everything, those two things colliding, it makes for a perfect song. Like, that song just takes me places. It is very, very, very good. And we have pretty much we focused this episode around the kind of 90s emo years of Jimmy Eat World, which, inherently, it's part 1. This isn't what Jimmy Eat World are going to be, the last artistic milestone they achieve. But in just this part alone, look how far we come, where on these 3 records, you can track a band kind of starting very small, consistently furthering their capabilities and their identity, and going from those beginnings to becoming masters of their musical sphere, like the example of musical sophistication and class in their entire scene. It's a wonderful trajectory by itself, just these 3 consecutive albums.
It's unthinkable.
Yeah, no, it is a one-of-a-kind journey.
We literally heard them grow up.
Capitol don't really know what the fuck to do with Clarity. They sit on it for a long time after its completion. I think most of it is recorded in 1998 without a release date, to the point that Jimmy Eat World are like, okay, we spent all their money. Do they even intend on letting this out into the world at all? There was a chance that
imagine if they hadn't.
It could have just languished as this weird mutant experiment that the label lost money on. Eventually what happens is an A&R at Capitol apparently sends a version of Lucky Denver Mint into K-Rock, and that begins to unexpectedly, long before the album's release, get rotation on a very major rock station in America. And finally, the popularity of that song in these kind of circles spurs Capitol into doing something with the release. I was trying to track down the details of the deal here, and I couldn't quite do it. But in a deal with Fueled by Ramen in 1998, there is a self-titled EP that is put out. Again, 1998, this is pre-release of Clarity. This is leading up into actually getting its final release. That EP also features the non-album songs Softer and Roller Queen, but it is led by the newly released Lucky Denver Mint. We will do a bit on rarities in the next part, but those EP tracks, Mark, as you can imagine, everything in this era, favourites among Jimmy Eat World long-timers. Those two songs, both of them have something really cool about them, I think.
There's sort of... I don't even know how to... There's sort of a mellow, almost like lethargic quality to both of them.
They're quite sparse, I guess. But I think Roller Queen speaks to the kind of Jimmy Eat World fan, particularly in love with, this era. It's very gorgeous, as you would expect from something associated with Clarity. Softer, actually, for this kind of... It has a kind of, dark bass element to it that's kind of more menacing than anything on Clarity. It's really fucking cool sounding. Even, the do-do-do-do-do kind of vocalization sound uncharacteristically sinister on it.
As songs, I don't love them, but as different vibes and a different look into the headspace of these people in this era, I like them as sort of curios.
Well, you can kind of see why they weren't on Clarity, basically, but they are really cool little tracks.
Yeah, I agree. I like them a lot for those things. But Lucky Denver Mint is put out on this, and then it is included on the movie soundtrack for the Drew Barrymore rom-com, I think. I've never seen the movie. Never Been Kissed. So that's a wonderful association that this band have. But this is, again, it's protracted case, and by the time they are able to get making a music video for Lucky Denver Mint, the song is already falling out of the radio rotation that it had found on K-Rock, and ultimately Clarity fails to take off in any meaningful way commercially at first. In critical circles, it's mostly, I would say, it gets a pretty good, respected response, but in certain areas it gets slated for being too pretty, in a 3.5 review from Pitchfork. Let it be known that much more recently Pitchfork have doubled back and given it an 8.6. Fucking great.
That's still 1.4 less than it deserves.
But in the grassroots emo scene, it might not, it might have made Never Been Kissed the biggest movie in the world or whatever the hell. But in the grassroots emo scene, like we said, static prevails. Bands were looking at Jimmy Eat World going oh wow, you made a record sound pretty big. When this turns up again, you got to imagine the people in bands like Christie Front Drive, like The Promise Ring or whatever, all around at this time. Hearing Clarity would be like hearing your friends fucking go to the moon. The ambition, the orchestral expansiveness, the high sonic fidelity, the detail. That's game-changing shit, isn't it?
Yeah, even in 2022, I listen to it and I feel in awe. So to be around at the time, I can't even imagine what this was like. Yeah.
Like I said earlier, it sounds like the bar being raised and the whole kind of genre
to
leveling
unattainable heights, basically.
Yeah, but Jimmy Eat World have been preparing for the negative label outcome ever since before making the record. They knew this wasn't going to go well. That's why they made Clarity the way it was and filled it with so much money. So, rather than, woe is me, this is the end of our band, they've started basically building up contingency plans. The first thing they do is they start buying their own stock from Capitol Records and shipping it themselves to international distributors to just get their music into regions outside of America, and they then book their first European tours to go with. So I think it's Germany at this point in time. They start selling their own fucking records over to Germany and then go and play there for the first time and start building up a real fucking support and fan base in these kind of areas. When they are predictably dropped from Capitol Records after Clarity, they start forging plans using their own jobs on the side and so on to fund the recording of their next album themselves. As we know, after this whole mental fucking story of getting up and down on major labels, they've got a bit of an ace up their sleeve. And that's where we're going to leave it. We're going to follow that up next time with Jimmy Eat World. Thank you very much for listening.